President Obama makes a major about-face on his vow to end the war in Afghanistan on his watch. But is it enough to shore up the Afghans? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. President Obama will not keep his promise to withdraw all but a handful of U.S. troops from Afghanistan by the end of his second term. The Commander-in-Chief made that official today, upping the number of Americans who will stay in the country for the foreseeable future. But many inside and outside the military are asking, are the numbers enough to strengthen what has been a weak Afghan fighting force? Correspondent Kevin Corke reports from the White House tonight on a major reversal for this president.
While America's combat mission in Afghanistan may be over, our commitment to Afghanistan and its people endures.
A commitment that has now endured for 14 years and will continue with today's announcement that the U.S. will slow its withdrawal from Afghanistan, opting instead to have troops by the thousands remain beyond next year.
We anticipated, as we were drawing down troops, that there would be times where we might need to slow things down or fill gaps in Afghan capacity. And this is a reflection of that.
The president announced that 5,500 American troops would remain in Afghanistan into 2017. The president calling it a modest but meaningful extension of our presence. But for much of 2016, around 9,800 American troops will serve throughout the country in non-combat roles. Still, it's a dramatic shift for a White House that wanted to leave around 1,000 troops in and around Kabul by the end of the Obama administration.
This was a disaster waiting to happen. I think what the president is doing now is enough to contain the damage, at least until he leaves office.
The decision underscores the difficulty the commander-in-chief has had in achieving one of the central promises of his presidency, ending the longest war in American history. Already stung by the threat of ISIS and the reemergence of al-Qaeda, it's the Taliban that's now creating the most trouble in Afghanistan. The terror group briefly seized control of the northern city of Kunduz before being pushed back. That's the very same city where the U.S. military mistakenly bombed a hospital occupied by Doctors Without Borders, killing 22 in the process. The president apologized for the strike, but new questions are now being asked about whether coalition analysts believe the Taliban was using the hospital as a base.
The president's expectation is that he'll receive a full accounting of these facts in the context of a thorough, objective, and transparent report from the Department of Defense.
But experts say in a fog of war, especially one more than a decade along, decisions have consequences, which is why many believe that despite calls from the left to leave the region wholesale, the president in this case made the right move.
I've gotten to the point where anytime the president makes a national security decision that's not a disaster, I'm grateful for it. But I think this is not a strategy to win in Afghanistan. It is a strategy to avoid a disaster, to avoid another Iraq.
If he was disappointed that he had to make this decision, Brett, the president flatly today said no, adding that this was the result of a months-long review and reflected the wishes of commanders on the ground, and we heard that an awful lot today from this White House, Brett.
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. More on this with the panel in a bit. Former Defense Secretary Robert Gates says President Obama could never sell the war in Afghanistan to the troops or, frankly, to himself. I spoke to Gates earlier this week at his home in Washington State as part of an hour special we're working on about the state of the U.S. military. But Gates also talked about what he lived through with the president on the issue of Afghanistan and other military decisions, and what the president is living through now.
On Afghanistan, you wrote that you never doubted President Obama's support for the troops, only his support for their mission. What do you mean by that?
I think in the 2.5 years that I worked for him, there were only 1 or 2 speeches in which the president talked about the importance of success in Afghanistan and why it was important. But my view is that when a president sends troops in harm's way, he has to convince them that he believes risking their lives is worthwhile. He has to be able to convince them that their cause is noble and just and warrants their sacrifice. And even after he sent an additional 60,000 troops to Afghanistan, the president just didn't do that.
So do you think he just wasn't comfortable with that? He wasn't...
I think he had his own reservations, and that's what I write about in the book, about whether the strategy would work.
Oh, we've just seen that again, where he did the Syrian rebel train and equip program and told 60 Minutes he never really believed it was going to work from the beginning.
Yeah.
So is that kind of the...
Well, yeah.
And you have talked about the micromanagement from the Obama White House on the Pentagon, and that it seems like you were very frustrated by it.
It was the operational micromanagement that drove me nuts, of White House and NSC staffers calling senior commanders out in the field and asking them questions, of second-guessing commanders. That's the kind of thing that made me crazy. And I will tell you, it was with the background of having served on the NSC under 4 presidents before I was Deputy National Security Advisor, or including as Deputy National Security Advisor. And when I was Deputy National Security Advisor, if I would have tried to, even as deputy, if I had tried to call a field commander going around Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense, or Colin Powell, who was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I'd have had my head handed to me, probably personally by the President. That kind of interference was just unheard of when I had been on the NSC and in the White House.
What led you to say this about President Obama and the military? President Obama was, quote, deeply suspicious of their actions and their recommendations.
I think this was particularly true in Afghanistan. And I think there were people in the White House, and I don't want to name any names, who were constantly goading him and saying the military's trying to box you in, the military's trying to trap you, the military's trying to bully you, the military's trying to make you do something you don't want to do.
I'll name names. Was Vice President Biden one of those people?
I think so. And I was told so. And I think, but he was not alone. And you know, you can argue with the options that they were putting forward, as President Bush did. You can disagree with them, as President Bush did. That's totally fair, in my view. But to think that they are trying to mousetrap you, I think is a... If I were the president, and I truly believed that, I would replace those commanders that I felt were trying to trick me. So I worried a lot that he was hearing from people things that made him worry that the military was consciously trying to thwart his will, consciously trying to be insubordinate, and I never believed any of that for a second.
And that was the environment that he was making decisions in?
I think so, yes.
On Russia. I saw your op-ed with Condoleezza Rice. What do you make of Vladimir Putin?
I think it's not all that complicated. This is a guy who is all about lost power, lost glory, lost empire. He's all about he I think, internalized hugely the humiliations that Russia went through in the 1990s. The poverty, the weakening, the collapse of the Russian Empire. I mean, people forget, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire collapsed. And so Putin is all about how do you reestablish Russia as a world power, as a power to be reckoned with. You know, you ignored us on Serbia, you ignored us on Ukraine, you ignored us on Georgia, you ignored us on Kosovo. You're not going to ignore us anymore. We are going to be a player, we're going to be in there, and I'm going to assert Russia's national interest. I'm going to try and recreate a buffer of pro-Russian states on the periphery of Russia. And oh, by the way, and if in doing all of that I can poke the United States in the eye, I will leap at the chance.
He is.
So this guy is really all about reasserting Russia's role in the world. And that's his strategy. but he's very opportunistic. And frankly, I think if resisted, will stop. He's not crazy. He's not a megalomaniac. Well, not much. But I think he is an opportunist, but a realist also.
An opportunist who filled the vacuum. Fair
Absolutely.
to say.
I mean, he just waltzed into Ukraine and did the same in Syria.
For an administration, though, that made that humanitarian argument in Libya, and then in Syria, critics would say there's 250,000 dead in Syria. It seems like it's two different administrations.
Well, I mean, again, I'm probably the last person that should ever try and put a president on the couch, but I do think that the president saw us try and shape events in Iraq and fail, try and shape, in his view, fail. Tried without much success to do the same in Afghanistan, tried without any success to do it in Libya, and frankly, I think thrice bitten, twice shy. I think he wanted nothing to do with Syria because he saw my guess is he saw no good outcome for the United States by intervening directly there.
And so for the people who say, okay, so what? Russia takes the hit, they do the military action, they strike the ISIS terrorists, why do we need to be there? What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I think that our role should be limited. I would not put ground troops in Syria. I do think that a safe haven is an achievable thing. I think the idea of training somebody from the outside and sending them in is nuts. It's just not going to work. The only way you can stanch the humanitarian flow, the humanitarian disaster, is through some kind of a safe haven. And I think that that's achievable.
Our thanks to Secretary Gates. Up next, President Obama's top money man has a warning for Congress. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 32 in Chicago, where former House Speaker Dennis Hastert plans to plead guilty in a federal hush money case linked to allegations of sexual misconduct from decades ago. Hastert is accused of breaking banking laws and lying to the FBI. A written plea agreement is expected Monday. Fox 12 in Portland, as an Oregon woman kicked off an American Airlines flight, says she's getting a lawyer.
This can't be legal. Like, I seriously just doing it. I know you didn't see it. If you don't come off, I'm going to have to call the office.
Tina Foe says she did not hear a flight attendant's instructions. Video of her removal went viral. The airline has now apologized and says it has spoken with its crew members. And this is a live look at San Diego from our affiliate Fox 5. The big story there tonight, California's Great Shakeout earthquake drill. About 10.5 million people were expected to participate statewide. About 1 million of those were in San Diego. The goal is to teach residents what to do to stay safe during an earthquake. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.